Hello, sir.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I am well. You are here on Meyerside Chats. It's great to have you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, because the purpose of Meyerside Chats is to uh, bring people together and destroy this us and them narrative. And I'm sure you have plenty of opposition, as do most politicians, um, and I think that's okay sometimes. I think, toxic polarity is no good, but having diverse perspectives helps bring quality conversation and usually a better outcome. But we tend to get into like toxic polarity here. So my first sort of the thoughts I'd love to hear is, what is the problem with politics in 2022 that you, as you see it?
Um, so I don't want to pretend like everything was peachy keen in the past. There's been polarized politics, at various times throughout human history. I mean, if you look at the U.S. before the Civil War, or during the Civil Rights Movement, or during the New Deal, there's been a lot of polarization. And so polarization is not a new thing. But hold on, my light just went out. Let me trying to get it to go back on. I guess not. Um,
I think it's okay. I think you
okay.
look good. Yeah.
Thank you. Polarization is not new. But the polarization we're seeing right now is pretty extreme. And what I think is a little different is we're at a point in time where it's really hard, at least at the federal level, for people of different parties to even work together. That's not true so much at the state level. We actually, even though we have a supermajority in the California legislature, there are issues where there's bipartisan work, but at the federal level, it's just gotten harder and harder, even on issues where the parties, it seems like there's a lot of agreement, they still sometimes struggle to work together. And so that's what's the most challenging, right? Not just polarization around different issues, but this notion that you shouldn't even work with people you disagree with, and that's what's, I think, a little bit different this time, the complete demonization. And then social media has poured lighter fluid over everything. The complete demonization of anyone who disagrees with you. It just makes things harder and harder.
Yeah, there's a lot in there to unpack, but it's where people get their information from, the source of their data, and how they interpret that, and they turn a belief into a fact. Seems to be a problem on both sides of all the issues, is what I see. And of course, media gets eyeballs and advertisers based on engagement. So if it's not engaging, then people don't click it, right?
Right.
But there are there's other things that we can do, right? And of course, we won't cover them all today. But one of the things that we can do, for example, that I've seen that can clarify some things. Well, first of all, you've had a big success with a recent bill just last week, right?
SB107.
SB107. Yep. Yeah. And there was a ton of stuff going around about that, particularly around minors being able to have surgeries without their parents' consent. I think that's the number one thing that, like, most people that I know don't really have an issue with anything transgender, really. It tends to be that one thing, like what the parental control, if you're a minor, can you just go get through, right? So can you clarify that on this bill?
Yeah, I mean, that's not even the bill. The bill doesn't do that. And so this is one of those issues that, again, there's always been misinformation in the world and in politics. But the misinformation now, of course, is easier to spread, and it just spreads so quickly. And it's what's so bizarre is that SB 107 is literally a bill that enhances parental involvement and decision making around their kids' healthcare. and yet the opponents of it are basically lying and saying that it somehow takes away parental control. The reason we introduced SB107, I hadn't planned to do that bill this year. I hadn't even thought about that bill because it was unnecessary until Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, and then other Republican states started enacting laws and policies to say that if a parent allows their trans child to receive gender affirming care, that parent is a felon and will go to state prison for child abuse. The kid will be taken away and put in foster care. So these Republican states that claim they want to support parental rights actually only want to support parental rights when the parents are doing what they want them to do. And they're now saying that if parents make a decision as a parent about their kids' health care, that these states are going to put those parents in prison. And what SB 107, Senate Bill 107, which is now going to be the law in California because the governor signed it, what SB 107 says is that if you have a family, parents and children that are in a state like Texas, and they feel unsafe because they feel like they're going to be criminalized and attacked, and they need to leave that state, they can come to California and we will protect them. That we will do everything in our power not to send them back to Texas or Alabama or any of these other states for criminal prosecution, that we're not going to honor subpoenas from those states for medical records, and that these parents can be, and these kids, these families can be safe here. But the opponents who are trying to attack trans kids, trying to drive them to suicide, pretend they don't exist, and then criminalize the parents who are supporting their trans kids, these opponents are lying about the bill and claiming that it somehow undermines parental rights. It's the exact opposite. It supports parents.
Yeah, so there is, and of course, California is deemed as this state that is intended to do that ultimately, right? And I think there's other states have come closer or even do have that opportunity. Washington and Oregon are not sure exactly the line, but there are more rights for children to do that without parental consent.
Well,
is that true?
Yeah, California has long-standing parental consent laws, and we're actually less liberal than some other states. I tried to pass a bill this year to allow teenagers to get vaccinated on their own, to lower the age of consent for vaccination from 18 to 15. A bunch of other states, including some red states, allow kids to get vaccinated on their own for as young as 11, somewhere between 11 and 16. So we tried to do that. We weren't successful. But generally in California, the age of consent for healthcare is 18. That anyone under 18 typically cannot get healthcare without their parents' consent. There are a few exceptions: sexual health, right? Getting birth control or getting the HPV vaccine you can do at age 12. You can get mental health care at age 12 on your own. You can get health care relating to domestic abuse at age 12. But generally, subject to those exceptions, it's 18. If a kid is emancipated, of course, they can make their own health care decisions. And if a kid is effectively emancipated, they're supporting themselves financially, and so forth, they can make decisions for themselves at age 15. But the general rule in California is you have to be 18 to make your own healthcare decisions.
Right. All right. Well, thank you for that clarity. I hope that makes a lot of people clear on that, and hopefully what the intention is.
And to be clear, this law does not change anything about the age of consent for any healthcare. That's a separate issue. It's not even part of this bill.
Gotcha. So let's talk quickly about legalese in general. As it relates to this bill, and I've read the bill, it's got the typical legalese, right? Run-on sentences, words that using the third definition in the dictionary that no one knows. That's standard legal practice, right? I run businesses. I know how legalese works. I actually have a new idea one day to open up a law firm. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know how I do that. That doesn't use legalese. Because it's complicated and there's so much open to interpretation. And a lot of times you're trying to be as broad as possible and as specific as possible, right? It's like a weird balance, but it tends to create a lot of confusion and open for interpretation. And I don't know if that's the intention, but it seems to me that if legalese was clear, if the policies were clear and written in English, just like a business contract, which is also a problem most of the time in legalese, right? But if that change was made, where it's like, all right, we're going to make this clean and beautiful and easy to understand and unambiguous, would it solve some of this? Would it solve some of the problem? You think?
It would be great if all of our codes were in completely plain English, but that's not true in any state in this country, and it's not intentional. It's that the language has to be extremely precise because people are arranging their affairs and making decisions in compliance on what the law says. And if it's not completely precise, if there's ambiguity, that can create all sorts of problems, whether it's around contracts or whether someone's committing a crime. You have to be precise. And so in this law, for example, we have to be really precise. And we worked with some really smart family law attorneys. And then, of course, there were the process in the legislature with really smart people. But if you look in any law, it's there are times when it's not in plain English, and again, that's not intentional, but it's because it has to be really, really, really precise, and that can be frustrating for people who don't want to have to hire a lawyer to interpret something. But that's how the law works in all 50 states and under federal law, and frankly, in Europe and in other places, that you just have to be super precise so that people can know whether they are complying with the law or not.
Sure. And I guess my challenge to that is if that was happening, we would have less ambiguity in the law and what it means. When I go read the bill, like I have to me, I'm more confused than if I was reading something that just told me what I'm supposed to understand here.
Yeah.
So I know, the intention is what you're saying, but is that intention meeting reality, do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, the language is very, very precise. And there are a lot of, I think that the opponents have taken advantage of the precision and detailed precision of the bill, and then taken one sentence or one phrase out of context of the rest of the bill to try to say this is what the bill does when it doesn't do that.
Right.
They're saying that this bill allows people to kidnap kids and bring them to another state and have gender-affirming care. That's false. That's not true. And other just made up things like that.
Why do you think there's so much opposition towards a lot of these policies?
Because transphobia and homophobia in general have had a resurgence in the U.S. They never really went away. But we were moving away from them for a long time. They're back in full glory, and really just venal, horrible, cynical, gross politicians like Ron DeSantis or Greg Abbott or others have been literally politicizing the lives of LGBTQ children and using LGBTQ children as political pawns to meet these politicians' political needs, whether it's demonizing trans kids and who try to use the restroom that corresponds to their gender identity, or demonizing trans kids that try to play sports, or demonize LGBTQ kids in terms of discussing LGBTQ issues in school, and so on and so forth. It's just a demonization of these kids, and so that because of these politicians, there's been just a resurgence of very, very open transphobia and homophobia. We see it all over the internet. We see it in a lot of places now, and it's tragic because this is the lives of these children that are being devalued, and these kids are being told that they have no worth, that they're faking it, that they're scam artists, and it's just very unhealthy, and that's what's driving the opposition, because the right wing has decided that they can try to persuade people that, they're trying to trick your kids into becoming gay and trick them into becoming trans and trick them into having surgery, and that your kids are going to have surgery even though you don't want them to, and their teachers are going to manipulate them, and it's just all of this moral panic that they're creating around these kids, and trying to say they're going to steal your kids and make them gay or trans. And that, of course, is not true. These kids are who they are, and they should be affirmed in whoever they are, and instead of being demonized.
Yeah. Do you see that same, like, if your perception is that what you just say on the right to the left around this issue, does that happen the other way around on certain issues?
So I think on the, for those of us who are liberal, progressive, we want LGBTQ people, adults, children, anyone, to be able to be who they are. And if a teenager identifies, when I as a teenager, I wasn't out yet, but identified as a gay man, I couldn't come out when I was in high school. It would have been dangerous for me to come out because society would have told me that I was abhorrent for being a gay man. And we're seeing that with trans people and have long seen it with trans people. And I think a lot of us on the more liberal progressive side of the ledger try to affirm people and say, you are who you are and we love you for who you are. We're not going to tell you who you have to be, and just be a happy person. And we want to help you be a happy person, as opposed to judging people and telling people that there's something wrong with them. That's where you run into problems. I'm not saying everyone on the left is perfect, but I think that is a really sharp distinction between left and right. Although I will say there are plenty of Republicans who are very pro-LGBTQ. Unfortunately, their elected leadership does not represent them. Their elected leadership of the Republican Party in this country is overwhelmingly against LGBTQ civil rights. Not everyone. There are Republican elected officials who will do the right thing, but overwhelmingly, unfortunately, there is that divide.
Yeah, I mean, my experience is that it doesn't even matter what most of the people think. It matters what gets the most news coverage and what the headlines are that people have to talk about, right? And we tend to get stuck in the debating extremisms when I do believe that most people have the same values and aspirations in general. Housing, for example, is one that I feel that way on, where everyone wants to house people. No one wants people to be on the street, right? But homelessness is complex. And it seems that, like, sometimes it's where it's the prioritization of things that people get frustrated with. So for like housing, for example, where we say, homelessness, what are the three root causes of that? Addiction, mental illness, and housing, right? Does that cover? Yeah.
That's a lot of it, yeah.
That's most of it, right? So it's not like, I'm not hearing people say, like, we shouldn't have housing. What I am hearing people say is that we need to focus on public safety first. So let's focus on fixing that side of it versus let's make sure to focus on housing first. So let's focus on mental illness first, say, because that's where, say, more of the public safety problems rely on, and the addiction versus the housing. Can you clarify?
Although most homeless people are neither mentally ill nor addicted, they're just poor. But there's definitely a sizable minority who do have those issues, for sure.
Yeah, and it seems that it just depends on where people get their data from. So that's what I'm saying. It seems like there's a lot of people who are saying addiction is the biggest problem because the data supports it this way. And then there's a lot of people saying, well, it's actually housing because the data supports it this way. No. What are your thoughts on prioritization in general, around how we do things, but also around this issue?
Around homelessness?
Yeah, around addiction, mental illness, and housing.
So the fundamental solution to homelessness is housing. And it wasn't that long ago that people who may have, they either have no mental health or addiction issue and they simply could afford an apartment, or they maybe had some sort of mental health or addiction issue, but they were still able to have an apartment they could afford. I have a friend of almost 25 years who for quite some time was addicted to meth. He worked the entire time. He had a job, was successful, had a place to live. He was addicted to meth. He eventually got into recovery, thankfully. And there are people with mental health issues who could afford a place. It used to be in San Francisco, if you had a disability check, you could afford a an SRO, a single room occupancy hotel. You can't do that anymore. The cost of housing has pushed a lot of just straight up poor people and a lot of people who with mental health issues who were functional have pushed them into homelessness. And then for the more extreme examples of people with mental health or addiction challenges, yes, that's always been an issue, and it's frankly gotten worse because when people get pushed onto the streets and they have mental health issues, those issues will probably be exacerbated. So getting people housed is the most important thing we can do. And yes, we absolutely have to ramp up and make more available treatment for mental health and addiction. It's not enough of it. It's too hard, even for people like, who are privileged, even for people who have good insurance and have resources, they may struggle to get mental health treatment. So we have to do both.
Right. Yeah. And do you think that that is the issue? Do you believe that most people agree that housing is needed, just to the degree?
I think, yes. I think there are people who take what they call like a tough love approach that don't agree with. Well, we call it housing first. Housing is the most important thing. And even if someone is using drugs, it's better to have them housed than to have them not housed. Sorry. We have the Blue Angels this week.
Wow. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. But there are people who will take the position you should only be able to keep your housing if you stay sober. If you're using, you should get bumped out of your housing, which to me is so counterproductive. To say, okay, you have a drug problem, let's put you out in the streets or in a homeless shelter instead of housing, and expect you just to get better. Housing is really foundational. Some people may need to have a transition into housing. They may not be ready right away for housing. And so we have to have different options for people to get stable. But ultimately, housing needs to be the goal. That is the bedrock for solving these problems.
So from the public safety perspective, for the people that are a problem from a public safety perspective, is what we're putting up in terms of housing and the policies going to solve that, reduce that? Is it prioritizing that?
So when you say public safety problem, if you're talking about like the most visibly debilitated homeless people on our street, people who are severely mentally ill, maybe schizophrenic, maybe using drugs, particularly meth, which can make people a little more aggressive. For people like that, we want to get people stable. For the people who are unraveling and dying on our streets, for some people, conservatorships are a good option. So someone else is making decisions for you until you get stable and healthy. But for people like that, and for others, supportive housing is a good option, where you have people in housing in what's probably going to be a very small unit, but they're housed and they are surrounded by services. They have the on-site support services for their mental health needs and addiction and so forth. And so you don't just plop them into a home somewhere and say, okay, you have a house, bye. Hope all is well. There are people who need those supportive services. That's why we call it permanent supportive housing. And so it's a mix. For people who are just poor, they're low-income renters, they lose their housing, they're homeless for a short period of time. And if we can rapidly rehouse them, they're not going to need a ton of support. They just need a place to live. But for other people who have been homeless for a long time or who have other issues, they're going to need more support to transition into a stable housing situation.
Right. Yeah. It does feel to me that a lot of times we just get lost in the politics. We get lost in the extremism. We get lost in the prioritization, and I don't know what the answer to that is. And I suppose part of why I'm here is that this doesn't need to be a toxic, vitriolic conversation. We're talking about helping people, right? And a lot of times what happens is people's experience will dominate the conversation. They say, well, what I'm seeing is drugs. I have to walk my children past people who are lying on the floor. It's very unfortunate. There's violent crimes being committed by these people. And if that's the if that's the number one thing that people are experiencing, then if you remove that, then their negative experience goes away. And then we have to solve the people who are in their cars, people who are in shelters, right? But I guess maybe, do you think that's why it's partially selfish, but also sort of pragmatic in a sense too, right? Like you can't blame people for that, right?
Well, I think I don't think it's selfish. I think when people see really bad situations on the street, they see someone shooting up, they see someone who is out screaming at everyone and yelling in the middle of traffic, or someone sleeping in their own excrement, they experience several emotions, as do I. Horror that we as a society are allowing someone to live like that and to kill themselves, basically. And then also compassion, wanting to do something to help that person. And then also horror that, they and their neighbors and their kids have to see that and experience that. And so I think that's why there's overwhelming support to try to transition these folks into a safer, healthier setting. Including some people, they need extra help, like a conservatorship, trying to get people into supportive housing, quickly trying to get someone into shelter, and trying to get someone the help they need. We tried to pass a bill to authorize safe consumption sites in LA, San Francisco, and Oakland, so that people who are using on the streets can instead go inside and use, and not use in front of your children, not use on the sidewalk, not throw their syringe on the sidewalk, not use a dirty syringe and get HIV or hepatitis, but instead go inside to a healthy, clean setting where we can get people eventually into recovery, reverse their overdose so they don't die if they do overdose, and have it be where it's not where your kids are. It's not in front of your home or your business.
Yeah. Well, what you're saying sounds good in many aspects, but I guess I would follow up with why the opposition then?
People just have a lot of, from their own life experience and their own views about what they think works. And to be clear, there are some people who, for example, who are using drugs where a more tough love approach does work. There are some people that, some people will say, I went to jail for 6 months and got clean, and I've been clean ever since. For some people, I don't want to in any way devalue people's experiences. For some people, that can work. Or just going into a pure abstinence situation where you just lock yourself down, you don't use, and then you go into recovery and stop using. I'm not trying to erase those experiences. For most people, that's not how it works. And we know that we because of the war on drugs, we've cycled addicts through prison for 50 years. And although some of them will get clean and sober, a lot of them won't. And so this notion that if we just do this global tough love, whatever you want to call it, that it's going to solve the problem, it's not going to solve the problem. It will be very expensive. It will be very, very expensive. Prison is really expensive, and it doesn't solve the problem. The war on drugs didn't solve the problem. The war on drugs and the tough love approach was globally a successful strategy. We would have no addiction in this country. We've spent trillions of dollars incarcerating drug addicts for the last 50 years and criminalizing drug use. How's that going? It's been an abject failure. So let's try something else.
Yeah, I hear you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and thank you for sharing your thoughts on both sides of the different issues. And hopefully, again, the purpose of this podcast is to help people at least see why people are thinking the way they are, and to have better conversations so we can come to more balanced approaches without the toxic polarity. And that's my agenda. So appreciate you being here. I like to do a little fist bump as a thank you.
Okay, there you go.
Boom. And I will talk to you and see you soon.
Thank you for having me. Have a wonderful day.
My pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye.